Wilfred? That show doesn't matter. Fuck that show. Just kidding. I love that show. Let's do it. Sanity and happiness are an impossible combination. I remember the first time I stumbled on Wilfred. It was during that golden age of FX before Netflix became a major streaming service, and FX was one of the few channels investing in quality, thoughtful content. I was a huge Lord of the Rings fan when I was younger, and so when I saw Elijah Wood starring in a comedy show on a TV channel that I would regularly turn on before the days of streaming, I was interested. That and the fact that in the commercials there was this fat, sweaty Australian guy in a dog suit doing dumb shit made me actually care to watch what seemed like was going to be a very unique show. At the time I was in high school and I had gone through a lot of life situations that many of my peers didn't quite understand, and that made me feel like I was weird. Sorry, scratch that. I was weird. I won't go into specifics because that's my experience, and that shouldn't validate or invalidate anyone else's relationship with the show that I'm talking about here, but suffice it to say, I went through 5 different psychologists in 2 years, and each one was better than the last, but the whole process ended up making me feel like this oddball that needed to be researched and tested in order to be understood by my family. My psychologist would ask me questions that my mother never really asked me. How was your day? How are you feeling? Is there anything you want to talk about today? It's a simple thing to ask someone to share themselves with you, and yet it's a routine that few people, especially family members, think to do with someone that they interact with every single day. And we've created an entire industry of medical practitioners who get paid to ask you questions about yourself and help you understand what you're going through with complete objectivity and without personal bias. We had been reading the book Flowers for Algernon in my AP English class during all of my visits to psychologists, and I had never felt so seen by any kind of media in my life at the time. That is until I saw Wilfred. Just a heads up, there's going to be spoilers in this episode for the entire series. It might not make a ton of sense if you haven't already seen Wilfred and know the source material. That's not to say that you're stupid. It's just that Wilfred is kind of a unique show, and you really just have to see it to understand what it's all about. So with that spoiler warning out of the way, let's go ahead and do a recap of the series because it's been a long time since the show aired. Wilfred is a show about a man named Ryan who struggles to connect with the people and the world around him. He's got a crush on his neighbor, which is driven by the fact that, well, yes, she's beautiful. She's also the only person who seems to give him any sort of attention besides his sister. It's a crush almost born out of necessity for a lonely burnout living by himself. He's a lawyer who hates his career, and with seemingly no one around him who cares, Ryan ingests a copious amount of prescription sleep meds in a suicide attempt. What's interesting to note about the suicide is the fact that he gets well dressed, he takes his time to write a letter, he mixed his pills in with a banana smoothie. This all adds up to revealing something about Ryan's character. He's not a man who wants to die, he's a man who wants to find happiness and be seen in an understandable and acceptable way. He doesn't enjoy the idea of killing himself, he enjoys the idea of banana smoothies, of looking respectable and being well spoken. You could argue that this was more of a cry for help than anything, but in this tragic case, there would have been nobody around to hear it. And I think that's what makes Ryan a special character. He's somebody who wants to be more than he is, but doesn't have the people around him who would support him to become that. Now, there's a lot of fan theories about what happens next. Some say he overdoses and actually died, and the rest of the show is just a giant DMT trip as his brain gets flooded with tryptamine. Some say the drugs failed to kill him but caused permanent hallucinations. And some take the show at face value when it's revealed that the pills were just placebo medicine and believe that it facilitated a psychotic break. All of these theories are intended to make sense of the fact that he starts seeing his neighbor's dog as a man dressed in a dog suit. The two characters go on to experience some hilariously strange shit over the course of the show, and Ryan is just as confused as the rest of us by all of it. Wilfred the dog seems to know more than he's letting on. There are characters who appear to see Wilfred the same way Ryan does, which never seems to add up to anything or make sense. There's a whole cult of people who worship him as a god, kind of. There's a basement where the two smoke weed together, and that ends up not being a basement but a closet the whole time. And there's a million things that would be considered plot holes and cheap twists if the show didn't outright acknowledge them as inconsistent and insane through Ryan's own confusion with it all. The fans of this show, like I said, all have theories about it, and all the theories are really just meant to try and make sense of why the show is the way it is. Or in other words, diagnose what's happening with Ryan. You could probably get the entire arc of this show in 2 episodes. Just watch episode 1 and then the finale back to back. For someone who hasn't seen it, the message and narrative is very clear. He's kind of this guy trapped between his need to do what he thinks his family wants and move forward as his own person. And all of that pushes him to his breaking point. The fact that he's a lawyer shows that he became what he thought his father wanted him to be. His sister, who became a doctor, clearly also followed her family's traditional view of success, and she struggles with her own issues manifested through her infidelity in her marriage. Wilfred tells Ryan that he only shows others the version of himself that he thinks that they'll like, and he smokes pot with a dog in a closet that transforms into a basement, which is really just a symbol of his subconscious trying to escape from reality and comprehend all the things he's experienced in life. His social awkwardness is a representation of his inability to form relationships as a result of trauma. And at a critical mental breaking point for him, his neighbor's dog shows up, who becomes the one person that he's able to form a real relationship with. The rest of the show that's sandwiched between the pilot and the finale is really just Ryan going through the psychological loops and motions of someone trying to understand, self-diagnose, and self-medicate what he thinks his problem is. And he learns throughout the show that other people also suffer from inescapable trauma. It's clear that Ryan has some kind of mental illness, but it's never explicitly stated what. Sometimes what he's going through seems like depression, schizophrenia, psychosis, and sometimes it's sort of a mix of all, which would have come off as disingenuous, callous, and in some ways harmful if the show were told from the perspective of an outsider looking in, because we'd be attributing defined symptoms to a man who represents sort of all the emotional and mental disturbances that could manifest in any human given enough trauma and lack of interpersonal relationship. Instead of outright defining Ryan as depressed or schizophrenic, Ryan is really more of this everyman who just barely has his shit together, but enough so that few people even detect that anything's going wrong with him. He's going through all of these psychological episodes, and yet he's able to function as a normal human being in society on the outside. There are moments where his sister or his mother or his father identify that he's going through something, and they try in their own way to do for him what they think is best, but because he remains undiagnosed throughout the course of the show, we get this sense that none of them are ever really right. If anything, they're just projecting their own issues onto Ryan, who is a completely unique human being with a valid and distinct life experience from everybody else. Hell, even the doctors continuously misdiagnose or fail to understand Ryan as a person, even when he voluntarily institutionalizes himself. Ryan is all of us, experiencing very real emotional pain while trying to be who others expect us to be. How was your day? How are you feeling? Is there anything you want to talk about? These are the simple questions that nobody asks. The show ends on this bittersweet moment where Wilfred is put to sleep after an accident reveals that he has cancer. Ryan has to say goodbye to the most meaningful friendship he's ever had with what can, in hindsight, be seen as a reluctant and untrained emotional support animal, whose only goal the whole time was just to help Ryan overcome the traumas and pressures that had taken root in his life. In the end, the real story of who Wilfred is or where he comes from isn't what matters here, because the truth is that he's a dog that offers Ryan the emotional support he needs in a transitional period in his life. And Ryan comes out of the whole experience more brave and accepting of himself than he ever was when we met him. Wilfred matters because it takes a butt-sniffing, impulse-driven, and at times manipulative relationship to show us that happiness is more than the lies that we tell ourselves. In the end, Ryan doesn't care if the girl next door loves him because he's learned to love himself. He sees that she's gone through her own issues that keep her from leaving a relationship that she longs to escape. He doesn't care what his family thinks of him because he's seen that they all had their own baggage. He accepts that the world around him can call him whatever they want, but they can't call him lonely anymore because he had Wilfred, who showed him that the world is built on facades and that he's not the only person dealing with trauma while trying to find happiness. Happiness does not depend on outward things, but on the way we see them.